Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm beginning with the prayer. Nada te turbe, nada te espante, todo se pasa, Dios lo se mueve, la paciencia todo alcanza. Quien a Dios tiene, nada le falta, solo Dios basta. Let nothing disturb you, nothing frighten you. All things are past. God never changes. Patience attains all things. Whoever knows God lacks nothing. God is Allah. Solo Dios basta. So we're very excited to welcome you this evening to the 6th annual lecture in Carmelite Studies, organized by the Center for Carmelite Studies, which is sponsored by the Carmelite Province of Most Pure Heart of Mary and is part of the School of Theology and Religious Studies here at the Catholic University of America. My name's Father Stephen Payne, and until a few weeks ago, I was the chair of the center at the time when Melissa Butner, our program manager, and I were inviting Professor Carlos Eire to our surprise and delight, he graciously accepted. I was particularly delighted because a few years ago I had read and reviewed this fine little book by our speaker called The Life of Saint Teresa, a Biography. And it's not what you would expect. It's not a biography of Teresa. It's the biography of the book of her life. It tells you how it went on and had such an impact. And I'm currently finishing reading his latest, They Flew, A History of the Impossible. I've almost finished. And it includes also many pages on St. Teresa of Avila. So my successor, Father Craig Morrison, the new chair, gave me the honor of offering these brief words of welcome. But my main job tonight actually is to welcome our Dean of the School of Theology and Religious Studies, Dr. Joseph Capizzi, who will introduce our speaker. Dr. Capizzi is Ordinary Professor of Moral Theology and Ethics here, and he served for many years as the Executive Director of the Institute for Human Ecology. And moreover, as I believe he will explain, he knows our wonderful speaker from his own student days. So let me turn things over to Dean Capizzi.
Are people shouting me out? Is that what just happened? Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you, Craig, new director. Thanks to the Carmelite community, of course, for the gift of the center and what makes this possible, the capability to have such wonderful speakers come in to support student studies, to support the study of history of Carmelite, the community and their thinkers. It's really wonderful. Yes, so our speaker tonight, he is one of the main reasons why I am the Dean of the School of Theology and Religious Studies. So you can blame him or thank him, depending upon your assessment of how things are going. I was an undergraduate at the University of Virginia when Professor Eire, we don't refer to our teachers as doctors at Mr. Jefferson's University. We call them Mr. or Professor. When Professor Eire was teaching there, and I took his History of Christianity Parts 1 and 2, right? Yes. And then his medieval mysticism courses. So those courses were deeply formative in my own life. He was a wonderful teacher. In addition to the kind of publications he's done, and there are many more books than this. His magisterial Reformations was published just a few years ago. What was it, 2016? And then, of course, he won the National Book Award for his book, his own memoir, Waiting for Snow in Havana, right? Was that around 2003 or so? He's an incredibly beautiful writer, but in addition to that, and this is going to be no surprise, he was an amazing teacher. And I was actually just talking to one of our own grad students, Joseph, and explaining to him that part of what drew me to the study of theology was the love that Professor Eire conveyed for the things he was working on. And of course, as an impressionable and drifting young man at the time, it really drew my attention and it caught my own interest, and the things he shared with us in the classroom drew me to theology. So an amazing teacher, an amazing professor, wrote me a letter of recommendation as well. I don't know if he remembers that. and just an incredibly gifted historian of the Christian church. So I am so grateful that you agreed to speak with us tonight. Thank you. And my only regret is that my wife couldn't be here. She wrote her thesis as an undergrad on St. Teresa, so she would love to have heard this. I just texted her and said, "Get online. It's about to start." My hope is she's able to watch it, but if not, I believe this will also be available afterwards. So um, spread the word about this. Anyway, thank you so much, Professor Eire, and
thanks to everyone who brought me here. Thank you. Who I need to name. I am delighted to be here. I consider it a great honor. And working on Teresa, Saint Teresa, throughout my life. Mike. Oh, okay. How's this? Better? While working on Saint Teresa throughout my entire career, whether in teaching or in writing, this acquired this affinity to Carmelite spirituality, and great figures such as Saint Teresa and Saint John of the Cross. So it's an extra delight to be here, sponsored by the Center for Carmelite Studies. Staying at Whitefriars overnight. Very special. So, what is the problem when Saint Teresa's Ecstasies? Let me see if I can get this stuff out. Oh, okay, great. All right. What is the problem? It's not responding. Okay. It's not changing slides when I hit enter. What do I need to do? Just click there. Okay. Thank you. We'll begin with this quote, and I'll reveal to you where this quote comes from presently. The Holy Mother, this is Saint Teresa, was very humble, and she dearly wished not to be considered a saint. So she constantly begged me and her other daughters to pull down hard on her penitence whenever we saw her rising into the air. And whenever she began to feel that the Lord wanted to elevate her, she'd grab onto the floor mats, and the grills in the choir. The very things. She'd also beg our Lord to stop bestowing such favors on her from now on. And one day she eventually attained this from our Lord. This comes from the testimony of Sor Isabel de Santo Domingo in the processes of the canonization inquest for Saint Teresa. And there are no images of Teresa levitating, but AI has provided us. Another story that I might have time to relate is when she went up with a frying pan in her hand. And I wanted AI to create that image, but I was unable to do so. So, image generated by Prof. Teresa Sanchez de Cepeda y Ahumada, 1515, 1582. Her religious name was Teresa de Jesus. In the English-speaking world, she's known as Saint Teresa of Avila. And this is the only life portrait known of Teresa, painted in 1576 by a fellow Carmelite, Juan de la Miseria. And here's what she had to say about the portrait. Teresa's response: "God forgive you, Fray Juan. You've made me ugly and blear-eyed." All descriptions of her refer to her beauty, her natural beauty. And I think Fray Juan probably captured her very correctly here, although she was unhappy with it, as we all are with our photographs. Ecstasies are altered states. And in her Vida, she tries to wrestle with the terminology for the different kinds of mystical experiences that she's had, and she doesn't help you much. I would like, with the help of God, to be able to describe the difference between union, rapture, or elevation, or what they call flight of the spirit, or transport, which are all one. I mean, all of these different names refer to the same thing, which is also called ecstasy. And these English translations, there are variations. We don't have time to go into the English translation of the Spanish terms, but these are the most commonly used. So her autobiography is really not an autobiography. It's a judicial document written for the Spanish Inquisition under the supervision of her confessors. Why might that be? It's all those ecstasies. The Inquisition prohibited the circulation of the manuscript copy of her Vida. And when it was finally published in 1588, 6 years after her death, it kept being denounced to the Inquisition, heretic, many times. It only stopped, the denunciations only ceased with her beatification in 1614. And actually, what I think I have figured out is that the Inquisition received all these denunciations and quietly filed them away without acting on them after her death. So here are some condemnations of Teresa's autobiography, which, is filled with descriptions of these ecstasies. This book has the venom of heresy within it, so secretly expressed, so well disguised, so smoothly varnished, that those who are ignorant, as well as those who are the subtlest of theologians in the world, can use it as a sealed and closed manual or a scripture read in the dark of night, unnoticed, like Catholic ears. Its inspiration could have been received from an evil angel, the same one who fooled Muhammad and Luther and all other heresiarchs. The ultimate proof of this is the fact that it broaches subjects that exceed the capacity of any woman. and this comes up time and time again in the denunciations. How could this woman doing all this? So this is from a Dominican. I'll also let a point. The 1589 denunciation. Teresa was born in Avila, which still looks pretty much like this medieval walls. Born on 28 March 1515. And Avila is right in the center of the Iberian Peninsula on a very high plateau. It is kind of cool in the summer, cooler than most of Spain. And in the winter, it can get very, very cold. This is the convent of the Incarnation, the Carmelite convent, which she entered into as a teenager. After her mother died, her father sent her to live with the Carmelite sisters. But in November of 1535, her 20th year, she joined the community. But then she had a series of mysterious illnesses no one could diagnose, much less cure. And we're going to have to skip over that story. But her 20s and into her 30s, she endured great suffering. As a matter of fact, at one point, she was taken for dead. And her family was carrying out the wake. And they thought she was dead. They held the mirror under her nose, and there was no sign of breath. But then a family member fell asleep during the wake, knocked over a candle that set the curtains on fire, and she reared up, scaring everybody. She had to learn how to walk again. Months and months she crawled on all fours. So this woman was very sick. So let's skip over to her mystical life, which begins in her 40s. In 1555, the image you see here is that she was praying to a three-dimensional sculpture or figure of Christ at the scourging, which had mirrors along the back so that you could see all the stripes on his back. But here, this artist, Diego de Leyva, is representing it as a vision. At this moment, when she was praying before the statue, that she began to have visions of Christ. And here's a brief description of what started to happen to her. I used unexpectedly to experience a consciousness of the presence of God of such a kind that I couldn't possibly doubt that he was within me or that I was wholly engulfed in him. This was in no sense a vision. See, she corrects all this. I believe that it's called mystical theology. Thanks for the terminology. Yeah, she's trying. She's trying. The soul is suspended in such a way that it seems to be completely outside itself. Great love of God grew within me, and I didn't know who had put it there because it was very supernatural. And I had not sought it out. That's a very important thing. She had not sought out any of these gifts, favors, as she calls them. She lived in troubled times, tough times, she calls them, tiempos recios, especially in the 1550s. But in Spain, there were a group of devout, pious people who ended up being given the name alumbrados, the enlightened. And their theology ended up being called alumbradismo. And the scholarship on this is still full of disagreements as what this was it real? Was it invented? Did these people really exist? Did they actually teach the things that the Inquisition said they taught? Doesn't matter. A key element of alumbradismo was silent prayer quiet, which required recogimiento, which is to gather all your senses in and on your core of your soul. And dejamiento. That thing's gone. Which goes, a term that goes back centuries in the Christian mystical tradition, but especially strong in Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican mystic. Gelassenheit, a term then shamelessly copied by Martin Heidegger. And several future saints were accused of alumbradismo, including Ignatius Loyola. And a very recent, fairly recent biography of Ignatius Loyola, not yet been translated into English. There's ample proof that the reason he had to leave Spain or France and why the Jesuits began their history in Paris rather than Spain is that he had to flee the Inquisition for his alumbrado-like practices. So Teresa, as you can imagine, this is going full tilt, beginning in the 1520s through the 30s, 40s, and 50s when she starts to have these mystical experiences. There's always a possibility she could be an alumbrada. It's also the time that Protestants begin to show up in not high numbers, but in any number in Spain. And the Inquisition blurs the lines between alumbrados and Protestants. There you see an image of the Auto de Fe of Valladolid, 1559. But there were also 3 more Auto de Fe's in Seville, 1559, 1560, 1562, where Protestants were ferreted out. And not that many, under 100. And no, it's terrible. But it's under 100 of Protestants were discovered in Spain, which gives you a sense of the size of the Protestant community in Spain was very small. But this man, Bartolomé Carranza, who was the Archbishop of Toledo, who had actually accompanied King Philip II to England, and he had served as Queen Mary's confessor, is appointed the highest church office in Spain. Archbishop of Toledo ends up being arrested by the Inquisition in 1559, accused of Lutheranism / alumbralismo, and he will spend the rest of his life in Inquisition prisons. Break to Spain, and then in Rome. After appealing his case, he went to Rome. He was largely cleared, but died just a few months afterwards. If this could happen to the Archbishop of Toledo, imagine what could happen to a Carmelite nun. And it is in 1559 that the first index of forbidden books is published in Rome. And there's one page from the list in which you can see Martinus Lutherus in the middle. Many of St. Teresa's favorite books of devotion were listed on the index. She had to turn them all in. And she said, when they took away many books written in the vernacular so that they would not be read, I was very sorry, because some of them gave me pleasure, and I couldn't read them in Latin. But the Lord said to me, don't be distressed. I'll give you living books. And then she adds, the Lord showed me so much love and taught me by so many methods that I have had very little need of books. The Inquisition would not look kindly on a statement of this sort. Right? She's bypassing the proper channels, and she's admitting that she likes these books that have been placed on the index for having alumbrado and Lutheran tendencies. She starts having visions of Christ. Oh, wait. I want to go back. I was trying to get rid of that thing on the top. And her confessors, all of them, tell her, you're not seeing Christ, you're seeing Satan. These are demonic apparitions. You're not seeing Christ. And here's some depictions of this. And actually, the image on the left is a depiction of her mystical marriage with Christ. I'm totally yours and you're totally mine. But her confessors keep telling her, no, 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 the devil is fooling you. And actually, one confessor gives her the advice, long-standing in monastic tradition. The devil is troubling you. Be as crass and vile as the devil. So he orders her to give Jesus fig. Sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's, 16th century equivalent of the middle finger. So he tells us in her Vita, she did this. Jesus appears to her. She gives him the fig. And he says, thank you. For obeying your confession. Now go tell him, I'm not the devil. So, at her canonization, Pope Gregory the 15th, in the bull of canonization, added this little item. She was wont to say that she might be deceived in discerning visions and revelations, but could not be in obeying her superiors. Now you begin to see all the suspicion. As long as she's obedient, she's okay. It's all right. She can give Jesus a fig. If she does it, she's better, much better. There's another image of the mystical marriage. And you'll be seeing several images from this graphic hagiography, which was published in 1613, just before her beatification. And it has wonderful images with a little bit of text at the bottom. So this is for the life of Saint Teresa for people who are illiterate, or people who want to use these images for devotion. And in the background, too, there are diabolical fraudsters, especially other nuns and beatas, these women in Spain who did not belong to religious orders or take vows, but lived a life of piety. That's a beata. There are many in Spain who in the 16th century were being considered living saints and were being venerated incorrectly as living saints. Best known case, Magdalena de la Cruz, the nun of Cordoba. And notice the dates. She lived till 1560. She was a stigmatized, supposedly ecstatic and living saint who would later confess to having a pact with the devil and was condemned to perpetual seclusion and penance by the Inquisition. And she lived in perpetual seclusion, doing penance between 1546 and 1560. But everyone knew about Magdalena de la Cruz, whose stigmata had fooled men. Then there's a case later, but a nun who walked the earth the same time as Teresa, Maria de la Visitación, also known as the Nun of Lisbon. She was a stigmatized, ecstatic prophetess and also a living saint. And she even fooled mystic Luis de Leon, who later wrote a very painful treatise on why God allows these things to happen. She was unmasked as a fraud and same condemnation, perpetual seclusion, and penance. Among her many mistakes that led to an investigation was as a prophetess, prophesying that the Spanish Armada was going to fail. And the devil is always in there. The devil is in the vida throughout, from beginning to end. Scourge of monastics, the scourge of holy people. Saint Teresa describes being the target of demonic assaults. And there you have from the graphic hagiography one such image. But she was also an expert demonologist. That's why she could say, I can tell the difference between the devil and Christ. And here we see her driving away demons with a cross. She also loved to use holy water. Demons. So, what do you do with unwanted visitors? And what is the appropriate response? Here's a description of one of these visits by the devil. He appeared at my left side in an abominable form. I took a close look at his mouth, especially because he spoke to me and it was horrifying. A great flame, which was all bright, seemed to come out of his body without any shadow. Great fear came over me. I made the sign of the cross as best as I could, and he disappeared but returned later. This happened to me twice. I didn't know what to do. I had some holy water, and I tossed it in his direction, and he never returned again. And then, in her Vita, she explains why this works. And this also allays suspicion about her. Power of holy water must be immense. I consider anything that is ordered by the church, and I'm greatly pleased to see that whatever words it consecrates the water, imbue it with so much power. So holy water works because of the church's power, not because of her holiness. She could see the devil assailing other people too, including in this instance, she describes it in the Vita, a priest who was in a state of severe mortal sin, celebrating Mass. She saw him being choked by two demons. But now we get to the most disturbing aspect of her ecstasies, disturbing to her. You would go up in the air during some of the ecstasies. And they were uncontrollable and they were unpredictable. She didn't know when it was going to happen. And here we have a rendering of the occasion where she went up as the Bishop of Avila was celebrating Mass. And every 16th and 17th century depiction of levitating saints always includes eyewitnesses. I hope we can come back to that point. That's very important, the witnesses. Here's her description of what it is, what happens. It seemed to me a tremendous force was lifting me up from beneath my feet. A force so powerful, I can't think of anything comparable. But then, of course, Teresa would also have some of the highest mystical experiences human beings are capable of having, such as encountering the Holy Trinity. And in her Vita, I should add, she constantly says, oh, I don't know how to explain this because I'm just a woman. I don't have a theology degree, and I'm just a little woman, una mujercilla. And then next page, she'll say, oh, but by the way, I understood the Trinity completely. This is other experience. I can't explain to you, but I understood it. And while all of this is going on, she's writing her Vita. She's being quizzed by confessors and the Inquisition. She begins the Carmelite reform and eventually establishes a separate discalced Carmelite convent in Avila, convent of St. Joseph, in August of 1562. And throughout the rest of her life, she would be establishing discalced Carmelite convents throughout Iberia. No high-speed trains. No internal combustion engine. Donkeys, mules. Carts without shock absorbers. And then, in October of 1571, even though she's at St. Joseph, she's appointed prioress of her former convent of the Incarnation, despite opposition from its nuns, and actually opposition from her too. But she obeys. And it is at the convent of the Incarnation, her prior convent. In May of 72, she brings in a young professor, much younger, John of the Cross, St. John of the Cross. Juan de Yepes y Álvarez. And here we have images of the two of them. And we're told the same thing about John of the Cross. He tried to hide or to impede his raptures as much as possible. Trouble for him too. Boy, and he gets into even more trouble. It's sometime between 1572 and 1577, when John of the Cross was serving as confessor, convent of the Incarnation, that Teresa's levitations return. Tells us they ceased in the early 1560s, but they come back. And she is seen levitating together with John of the Cross on the Feast of the Holy Trinity when they were discussing the Trinity. Up they go both. And notice the artist has added this important detail, the narrative, textual narrative, the eyewitness account. It says, when John went up, the chair went with him. And that's the locutorio, where the cloistered nuns met with the outside world and with their confessors. And it was at the locutorio. Notice, this is the actual locutorio. Notice there's a painting of this event in the present day locutorio. And it was visiting this spot in 1983 that set me off on this path. The young woman, I can't remember if she was a Carmelite or not, or if she was just from the Ministry of Tourism, just showing us around. Oh, here's the kitchen where Teresa cooked. Here's the refectory where all the nuns ate. Here's the staircase where she fell and broke her arm. Oh, and here's the spot where she and John of the Cross levitated together for the first time. Something happened inside of my brain. Being treated as a fact. Good Lord. So, John ends up being kidnapped by opponents of the Scalce reform and taken to Toledo and imprisoned for 9 months. But most of you might know the story. He ended up escaping. And there's another rendering of this levitating miracle. Notice the eyewitness. So, communing with the divine and wrestling with the demonic can also be said of John of the Cross and also Teresa of Avila. And here we have the graphic hagiography of John of the Cross cited there in the bottom. And there you have the twin levitation, but you also have another occasion when the devil was impersonating John of the Cross. And St. John of the Cross gets it. He too was an expert demonologist. Never underestimate the significance of the presence of the devil, who was not a metaphor in this day and age. More depictions of the same miracle. And there's an image from the graphic hagiography of St. John of the Cross that shows him being tortured by demons while levitating. Quickly, we know what St. Teresa taught from her 4 major texts. The Libro de la Vida, her interior castle, Spanish title, Morales, The Way of Perfection, and the Book of Foundations. Iconography of St. Teresa is supposed to always or often depict her with a quill in her hand because of how much she wrote. But quickly, the interior castle is the best place to get a sense of the kind of prayer and the kind of mystical experiences that drew suspicion over Teresa. And in the interior castle, there are 7 levels or 7 mansions. In the first mansion, you rely on vocal and mental prayer. And on the other side of that circle, one is the world. And she describes it as being filled with disgusting reptiles. The lure of the world. Second level, discursive and effective prayer. Third, the prayer of recollection, recogimiento. Then 4, that's the level where you can actually cross important boundaries between this dimension and the divine dimension. Even higher, prayer of simple union, level 5, spiritual betrothal, level 6, and then the highest, mystical union with God, spiritual marriage, number 7, level 7. This book came after she received a vision from Christ, picturing the soul as if it were a castle made of a single diamond or a very clear crystal in which there were many rooms, just as in heaven there are many mansions. In the center of this crystal is the sun, S-U-N, or the king, who gives all the splendor and beauty to the rest of the castle. Closer to the center, the greater the light. Go back to Meister Eckhart, 14th century Germany. And she gets Eckhartian mysticism through various channels. But then the disciples of Eckhart, like Bruce Brook and Suso, end up being translated into Castilian Spanish early in the 16th century. And these are the books that she loved. So, where do you find God? At your very center. So the interior castle is not about ascending to heaven, but diving deeply to find God within. This could be true. So, different levels of prayer as she describes them. Vocal mental prayer is like drawing water from a well, which requires great effort. Discursive effective prayer is your tug of war between world and God. Prayer of recollection, active, passive, has very few spiritual joys, and you keep diving deeper. Prayer of quiet, like cranking a water wheel or using an aqueduct, which requires much less effort than drawing up a bucket from a deep well. Prayer of simple union is like irrigating a field from a river or stream, far less effort. Spiritual betrothal, water, gentle, abundant rainfall, no work at all. And then 7, well, there's where the ecstasies and raptures begin. Spiritual marriage, the vision of the Trinity. But you can see there's a relinquishing of self on the way from 1 to 7. A relinquishing of thinking, complete shape of language. That's what the prayer quiet is all about. And Father Thomas Keating, Cistercian, who died fairly recently, has this quote, which I love because it also applies to Teresa and John of the Cross. Silence is God's original language. Everything else is a poor translation. So you can see why this might be seen as alumbradismo. And then, just so I don't lose track of time, I have a lot of quotes in these slides from Teresa's Vida and also from the interior castle. And I'm not going to read all of them. They're there. Might it be possible to post these in the Carmelite Studies website later for people to look through? And
Yes.
yeah, great. What happens to the body? What happens to the soul during these ecstasies? And that's a question that she wrestles with. And here's her description of what happens between body and soul. Very great and sweet delight, the soul feels it's fainting away almost completely in a kind of swoon. Begins to lose breath and all bodily strength. It can't even wiggle the hands without great pain. The eyes close involuntarily, or if they remain open, they can hardly see anything. And if it tries to read, it can hardly spell out a single letter or recognize it. All external strength vanishes, while the strength of the soul increases, so that it may better enjoy the bliss. And this is a key element in Teresa's description of her mystical experiences, is that there are different effects for the body and the soul. Effects of ecstasy on the body. I can attest that after rapture, my body often felt so light, it seemed to weigh nothing at all. And sometimes this was so overwhelming that I could hardly tell if my feet were touching the ground. For during the entire rapture, the body remains as if dead and unable to do anything itself. And Teresa's descriptions. No one else describes with as much detail what it feels like to be in one of these raptures and to get off the ground. I searched and searched, but I have yet to find anyone who has as much detail in the descriptions. And you feel like you're dying. Basically, that's what the second quote says. The soul is seeking a way to live that is very contrary to the will of the spirit or of its own higher part, which would prefer not to flee this suffering. One of my favorite quotes from Teresa. Faster than a speeding bullet. Anyone in this room that was alive in the 1950s and saw the Superman TV series knows what this reference is to. When all is said and done, I don't know what I'm saying. But the truth is that as quickly as a bullet leaves a gun when it is fired, there begins within the soul a flight, and I don't know what else to name it, which although it is noiseless, is so clearly a movement, it cannot possibly be an illusion. And this is from the interior castle. And there's the Spanish. That's my translation into English. Con la presteza que sale la pelota de un arcabuz cuando le ponen el fuego. And these raptures are simply irresistible. When I tried to resist these raptures, it seemed to me I was being lifted up by a force beneath my feet so powerful that I know nothing to which I can compare it, for it came with a much greater intensity than any other spiritual experience, and I felt as if I were being torn to shreds. For it is a mighty struggle, and when all is said and done, there's no point to it, if this is the Lord's will, for his power can never be overcome by another. And I'll pause for a second. We have these descriptions not only from her, but from her sisters, which appear in the canonization inquest and the beatification inquest. She gave them strict orders, as shown in the first slide, to hold her down, keep her down. by all descriptions. Yeah. Funniest scene? I actually had a good chuckle about this decades ago with another scholar who works on Teresa of Avila, because we had both just read this in the inquest record. She had a frying pan in her hand. The last few drops of oil the convent had were in that pan. Her sisters had orders to pull her down. They were worried. Pulled her down too hard. The oil might spill. Oops. And then, again, I'll pause for a second and leap ahead. And there's no slide on this. Look at this phenomenon. What Teresa is describing is what in medical terminology can be called a cataleptic seizure. Body gets rigid by all descriptions. And she's not the only one. This is very common, I found out. Cataleptic state, where your body becomes rigid, you lose sensation. So this did not happen to Teresa, but it happened to other mystics from her time period. Their brethren or sisters would poke them with needles.
Progress.
And it flames before their eyes. And they felt nothing. So, I was looking for a Protestant example that matches Teresa's example, because Protestants denied that mystical ecstasies, divine mystical ecstasies, were possible. But they accepted the fact that the devil can do things like this. So, just the phenomenon of levitating in a cataleptic state. In 1693, in Boston, teenage girl possessed by the devil. So the leading Puritan divine, Cotton Mather, who also took part in the Salem witch trials, is in this room with this young girl and several other men who are described as burly. And they're praying over this girl. Protestant exorcism. There's no holy water. There's no ritual. It's prayer. She starts to rise above the bed. Men jump on her, try to keep her down. They try to pull her down when she's up in the rafters. And they can't. And then Cotton Mather makes all these men write and sign affidavits that this happened. So, phenomenologically, these things are not similar. They are the same. So can these things really happen? Well, this is a Pandora's box full of questions that I have opened up. I'm going to go quickly now because I want to leave some time for questions. And here are some more quotes, and there'll be a series of quotes I won't be reading, but this is all very frightening. Very, very frightening. You feel like you're dying. So much so that she said, no pun intended. Yes, but I think it is a beautiful pun. She asks in the interior castle, think this is such a light thing when it seems to you that the soul is leaving the body and it sees the senses fleeing from it without knowing what is going on? Tan liviana cosa. The term levitation did not exist in the 16th century. It's a 19th century term invented by spiritualists. So liviano, levitation, lightness is the very essence of levitation. And it always happened to her at inappropriate moments. There's another, this is from another painting that depicts her rising in front of the Archbishop of Toledo. But this image is from the New World. It's from Chile, which shows you how far this travels throughout the earth. Teresa's life is everywhere that you find Carmelites. On other occasions, when I have felt that the Lord was about to do this to me again, I have lain on the ground and the sisters have strained to hold down my body, but the rapture has been observed anyway, as once happened during a sermon, a patronal festival when some great ladies were present. So what's the problem with all this? Humility, humility, humility. As St. Bernard of Clairvaux said when asked what is the greatest virtue. Calling attention to yourself is the last thing you want to do. Making much of it is even worse. So having powerful ladies present, having a bishop present while you do all this, you're just calling for scrutiny, very close scrutiny. That's the trouble. Sometimes I could resist it somewhat at the edge of exhaustion. And afterwards, I would be completely worn out like someone who has fought against the battlefield. Other times, resisting has been impossible, and my soul has been carried away instead, quite often my head too, along with it, without being able to stop it. Sometimes my whole body too, which has been lifted off the ground. Inappropriate interpretations, legitimate fears. This is from the interior castle in the 6th mansion. These ecstasies occur continually without any way of avoiding them, even in public. And then the persecutions and murmurings follow. And even though the soul wants to be free from fears, she is never free of them because so many people foist them on her, especially her confessors. So everyone around you. The appropriate response is humility. She asked God to stop all this because, as she says in the interior castle, she's speaking in the 3rd person. She complains. She, meaning herself, is not hurt by what people say about her except when her own confessor blames her, as though she could prevent these raptures. She does nothing but beg everyone to pray for her and besiege His Majesty to lead her by another road, as she is advised to do, since the road she is on is very dangerous. And the point of it all is this. Such effects reveal great things. Because she actually, she asks in the Vita, what's the point of all this? What are you doing this to me? God, why are you doing this to me? First, these things are a display of the Lord's mighty power, as we are unable to resist His Majesty's will, either in soul or body, and are not our own masters. We realize that however much this may pain us, one stronger than ourselves, and that He who grants us these favors, and that we, on our own, can do absolutely nothing. This imprints what? A great deal of humility in us. And I've already referred to this, that she says in the Vita that the levitation stopped. But later, in a letter to her brother, she tells him that, no, they've come back. And this description that she has in the letter is one of the best about what it feels like. Since the last time I wrote to you, my arrobamientos have been casting me off like a falconer does with a hawk. And it has caused me great grief, because sometimes it's happened in public and also during matins with the sisters. Resisting is futile, also impossible. So, it's making me feel so intensely ashamed. I would like to hide away somewhere. I continually beg God not to do this while I'm out in public. Please have mercy. Ask Him too, because these raptures cause too many problems and they add nothing to my life of prayer. Despite that point she makes in the Vita, they add nothing to my life of prayer. Lately, I've been walking around like a drunkard. And then everyone has seen the image of the transverberation. That's another whole other kind of ecstasy. I'll just show you some images quickly. There are more images of the transverberation than of any other of Teresa's ecstasies, a favorite with artists. And I love this one by Josefa de Obidos, a female artist who also painted a series of scenes from the life of Teresa. Giuseppe Bazzani, 18th century. Cut to the quick. Teresa dies in October 1582. She dies on October 4th. But the Pope has just changed the calendar, what we now know as the Gregorian calendar, adding 11 days to the month. So, her hagiographers say this was done on purpose, so she wouldn't die on the same day as St. Francis. Alva de Byrnes, one of the first Discalced convents established by her with the support of the most politically powerful noble family in Spain. And she has to go there for a baptism. Her presence has been requested. She has to travel all the way from Burgos, and they didn't have enough food to eat. All she had was some cabbage broth. And she was very, very sick. She dies of a hemorrhage. As soon as she gets to Alba, she starts the hemorrhage. And call it terminal ecstasy, because this is let's call it narrative. The narrative that follows her death. She is said to have died of a terminal mystical ecstasy. And two of her hagiographers interpret it as the soul being lifted from the body so violently that she began to bleed. But here's a description by one of these hagiographers, Diego de Yepes. She remained wholly absorbed in God with the greatest serenity and stillness, totally enraptured, novelty of what she was beginning to discover, rejoicing and enjoying her nearness to that which she had so keenly desired. And I don't know how many of you might be familiar with her poem, which in Spanish reads, Me muero porque no muero. I'm dying because I don't die. Death is the gateway to permanent experience of God. And she ends up becoming the mediatrix for souls in purgatory and an instrument of the Holy Spirit. And yes, Luis de Leon would say, I did not doubt but that the Holy Spirit was speaking through her in many places, and that it guided her pen in hand. But while she was still alive on earth, the manuscript of her Vita and all the other texts were off limits. So how does she get to be a doctor of the church? Well, how's this for a different interpretation of what's going on? This is Diego de Yepes, a hagiographer. God willed at this time, when it seems the devil is triumphant among the throng of infidels who follow him, the obstinacy of so many heretical nations, take aside, to disgrace and ridicule him, the devil, by putting before him not some valiant and learned man, but a lone poor woman. Sound the challenge, raise the battle flag, and to openly beget people who can trample, humble, and defeat him. Teresa, says Diego de Yepes, is God's answer to Luther. Ecstasy can become polemic in this time period. Look what we have on our side. Look what you don't have on your side. And look at this woman who negates everything that Luther is teaching. And there's another image from Josefa de Obidos, Teresa at prayer. So she ends up being declared Doctor of the Church, 27 September 1970, by Pope Paul VI, now Saint Paul VI. The title she is given All the doctors have special titles. St. Thomas Aquinas is the Doctor Angelicus. She is the Doctor Orationis, Doctor of Prayer. And there we have another stunning New World image of St. Teresa teaching churchmen and scholars from the 18th century. And we see members of many of the leading religious orders, and you can pick them out by their habits. Ecstasy can be trouble, but it can also point many, many, many other things that are not trouble, but wonderful. And this is one of the things that Bernini captures so brilliantly in this sculpture of St. Teresa, which is only one of hundreds of attempts that artists have made capture the incapturable. And it's just what all these ecstasies are about. So, okay. Questions?
Well, about 10 minutes, questions. And after that, we'll all gather for a little reception. So just raise the hand if you'd like to ask a question. And are we taking any from people online as well? Okay, great. So online, if you have a question, or here, if you have a question, switch your hand.
Maria Cecilia, I'm a professor of church history here teaching American and Latin American church history. And I was struck as you were reading her own words at this tension in her description of the arrobamientos as a fight between the body and the soul, but also an image of the unity of the two, because the thing that is experienced in the soul is also experienced in the body. And so I was wondering if you interpret her work as more of a defense of the unity of the two, or a defense of the soul's ultimate destination, which precedes that which the body would experience. Or if you don't care to share your own opinion, although I'm quite interested, if you have noted in the scholarship that followed her death, that the hagiography or the scholarship, whether people have interpreted her in one direction or the other. Is she representative of the split or of the unity?
Start with the last question. Yeah, there have been differences of opinion, but I tend to view paradox as central to the Christian faith, and especially the Catholic faith. These things are paradoxes. So yeah, the body and the soul are united, but there's a conflict due to original sin. And hence her poem, Me muero porque no muero. He calls the body a prison, straight out of Plato. Right? That tends to point in that direction. But then you read these descriptions of her ecstasies, and it's quite clear that there's a inseparableness, and that she interprets her own weird physical phenomenon of levitation as being caused by the unity between the body and the soul. I didn't have this quote on there, but in one place in the Vita, this is Teresa's understanding of science, which is probably very similar to mine, which is why I got my lowest grades ever always in my science courses. It said, soul is pulled towards heaven so quickly. Like you said, body has to follow. That was her interpretation, but then she adds, of course, I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. Please forgive me, I'm just a little woman, and I don't have a theology degree. But paradox, it's both, and not both. Yeah.
Maybe early to the lecture on stuff state. This is not, but I was wondering to what extent her descriptions of what was happening had a sexual or sexual dimension to it, and is that why there was efforts to criticize her or keep her down?
Well, this interpretation doesn't begin to pop up until the 19th century. And yes, in the emerging field of psychiatry, her experiences are sexualized, and in some cases, ridiculously so. Like Hannah never read a word Teresa wrote. He was basing his interpretation of her experiences on Bernini's stand. So, in her day and age, no, they weren't. And if they were, whoever was doing this was doing it so subtly that it escaped my notice. And it seems to have escaped everyone else's notice. It's not till my post-enlightenment that this begins to be thrown into the mix. But actually, there's a problem with the word that she uses to describe the transverberation, or where the sphere reaches. Entrañas, Spanish. Entrails. But quite often, as people have interpreted entrails as being farther down, and the whole thing gets sexualized. You do have a question online, I think, right? Great.
Yep. A question from online is, how did her earlier illnesses, if at all, play into the later ecstasies?
There tends to be in history a very close connection between illnesses, physical suffering, and the first steps towards the mystical path. I can think of so many, but perhaps the most outstanding is Julian of Norwich. To give her an illness that will almost kill her, but not kill her. And it is during this threshold experience or liminal experience that she has between life and death that she has all these visions that become the showings. Something about revelation and suffering, and also of witnessing being painful, being dangerous. It's not just that there's a connection between illness and the mystical experiences, but that the mystical experiences themselves cause immense pain with the people around you, or can. So yeah, there's an intimate connection there, and there hasn't been enough work done on this. But I am reminded of one article, Nelson Minich reminded me, 1982 Catholic Historical Review, article on St. Teresa's ecstasies. Title, I think, was, Did Teresa Suffer from Temporal Lobe Epilepsy? And the author's argument was that, yes, she matches temporal lobe epilepsy perfectly in her own descriptions. But I still remember, going back to 1982, even before you were at UVA, I read it in my office at UVA. So thinking, oh, that last line, wow. The last line goes something like this. So it's not what causes these ecstasies that's the point. It's what Teresa did with them that really matters. And, I am in this, that there has to be a neurological basis for spiritual experiences. There has to be. So the fact that, somebody goes into a cataleptic state doesn't mean that what is happening ache in some way, or that's a lot. So it comes out of it, like the last line in this article from 1982. So it comes out of it. It makes all the difference. So Teresa sees things. Yes, she tries to distinguish between whether she's seeing something with her eyes, with her mind, or with the eyes of the soul. And making those three distinctions is very, very important. But it points again back to this thing about soul and body, and our nervous system, and everything else is jumbled up. And then the great suffering seems to turn many mystics in a mystical direction. One more, Professor. Do one more.
I think there's transubstantiation.
Professor Eire. Is there any real evidence that there is a scar on the heart of Teresa of Avila?
Well, her body was examined again this summer for the fourth time, I believe. The last time it was done was in the 19th century by the professors of the medical school at University of Salamanca. They didn't find a scar, and the details of this year's exhumation, as far as I can tell, have not been revealed. 19th century, the Salamanca faculty didn't find a scar. They did find calcium deposits, which had been interpreted previously as thorns, like from the crown of thorns. But we have to, again, context. 19th century, Salamanca, Green Sector, who were the men examining this and making these. And the same will have to be taken into account for whatever is revealed after this year's investigation. There's a wonderful book, Pious Postmortems, by Brad Boulay, which tells the history of how the Catholic Church began to scientifically investigate bodies of saints and the many strange things that they found. Some of them, for instance, and the heart always plays a very key role in these pious postmortems or autopsies. St. Philip Neri had several broken ribs. This, and that everyone had always said that he had such a love for God that his heart had expanded and actually broken the ribs, and all other sorts of weird things that are found. The scar kind of makes sense, but I have to look into this, because if they should be looking for scars, it would be for people who have the stigmata. Because in her transverberation, it's not the heart that's pierced, it's the entrance. It's our own description.
Excellent. Thank you. You can see why I was drawn to study theology at the time in the classroom. Professor Eire, let's express our gratitude for them.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.